Hi, it's Robin from Chestnut Grove Studios in Tennessee. I have a bonus project for you at the end of this video on how to make your own wrapping paper, but we're going to start with an infinity greeting card. I'm using two of Shawn's stencils. The first one is the Scribble Flower 1. This one also comes with a mask. And the second one is Bouquet of Flowers 1. Then I'm going to have some craft paper and some cardstock. I believe that cardstock is 65 pounds, and those are 4 pieces cut 3 inches by 6 inches. I've also got some stamping ink and some rubber block stamps. Additionally, I am going to use a glue stick and the Fabri-Tac adhesive, one of the images from Shawn's butterfly collage pack, and a water pencil. Some acrylic markers, the Posca pens in white and black, a scoring tool, a ruler, and a tearing guide. That's from We Are Memories, and that's a decal edge that I'm going to be using. I've pre-cut the cardstock in 3-inch by 6-inch pieces, and I'm going to use this craft paper to adhere on both sides of 2 of them. So I'm going to show you how I'm using that tearing guide. You mark your marks where you're going to tear it, and then you use the water pen to dampen your paper, and then you tear it along the edge of the guide. This works on I've used it on cardstock, I've used it on scrapbook paper, and I've used it on the craft paper, and it works equally well as long as you wet it just a little bit. You don't want to saturate your paper, and then it tears perfectly against that edge. So to assemble an infinity card, again, you need 4 pieces of cardstock cut 3 inches by 6 inches. The craft paper that I'm using here is just an additional embellishment that I wanted to add, but for any infinity card you don't need to do this. I'm adhering it to both sides of only 2 pieces of the cardstock. Also, you're going to be scoring and folding these pieces of cardstock, so if you are adhering some kind of decorative paper or doing some collage work on top of any of the pieces of cardstock for your card, you need to make sure that it is adhered to the whole piece and not just around the edges. Because when you fold the card, and if it's not adhered on the edges, in the middle, then it will buckle. Next, I'm going to decorate a couple of the panels before I assemble the card. You have to be really careful if you're decorating before you assemble the card, because the way the design appears on the panel at this stage may not be in the same direction it would appear as you fold through the card after it has been assembled. But I experimented with a couple of prototypes, so I was pretty confident that I could at least do 2 of the panels before I assembled the card. I'm using a pretty monochromatic palette with this card. You can also use acrylic paint, but I didn't want to wait for the dry time with the acrylic paint, and I had the stamp pad in the colors that I needed. And so for the craft paper, that's my brown, so I'm using the white and black inks to stamp on it, and then when I work on the white cardstock, I will use the brown ink and the black ink. You'll see here I'm just masking out some of the pieces of the stencil that I don't want to use when I stamp through it. And also you will notice that I clean the stencil with a baby wipe after each use, because I tend to flip the stencils over and use the image from both sides, and if you don't clean that off when you turn it over, some of the ink residue would come off on your substrate. So I lined up the panels so some of the image would cross over, and I stamped on it that way because I liked that pattern continuing across the seam in the middle. Here I'm going to use one of the rubber block stamps to stamp a sentiment. This is going to be the very front of the card. A tip when you're using rubber stamps, I find that it works better if you press the ink onto the stamp instead of pressing the stamp down into the ink. This is because when I press the stamp down into the ink, I sometimes get residue or ink on the corners of my stamp because I'm pressing into it and that stamp pad gives. Whereas if my stamp is face up and I press the ink pad on it, that stamp is not giving. And so the ink only goes onto the stamp portion of my pad that I want to come off on my paper. So I'm just finishing up carrying that stencil pattern across both pieces of my front card image using the black and white ink on the craft paper that was adhered to the cardstock. Now I'm going to work on the second panel. These are just the cardstock, 65 pound. I'm using a piece of Post-it note to keep them together while I use the stencil. This is the Scribble Flower 1 stencil, and because I'm using the white base here, I'm going to use, again, you can see there where I used the stamp pad with the stamp face side up as opposed to pushing the stamp into the ink pad. So I'm going to use the black ink and the Distress ink, which is the color I'm using is Walnut Stain. I like to only have one stamp pad out at a time when I'm alternating colors because inevitably I will pick up the wrong ink pad and push it into the ink with the wrong color. So I'm randomly stamping some of the flowers with the black ink, leaving alternate flowers for the other brown ink. That's the Distress Oxide ink. I'm just going to stamp in the remaining flowers. This is the image that I intend to have as the second card. An infinity card uses these 4 pieces of cardstock attached together with some glue at the corners, and you are able to fold it into infinity. You can continuously fold it and it will rotate through 4 card images. Now I'm going to start scoring the card stock. I've still got those 2 pieces. The seam between those 2 pieces is going horizontally across the middle. So there I'm scoring it each piece in the center at 1.5 inches. And then I'm going to score down the cards. So I'm scoring down the 6 inches at the middle point. Again, for a scoring tool, you can use, I've used a mechanical pencil with the lead retracted. I've used a popsicle stick. I've used the edge of a palette. There's lots of things you can use. You don't have to have a fancy scoring tool. So I found it was much easier to see my guidelines on the cardstock that wasn't stamped on. So I turned it over to mark my score lines. My dad always told me to mark 3 times if you were trying to make a straight line, and you can see there I only marked twice and I missed one of them, but I was able to catch it. But if you mark 3 points, then all 3 are going to line up if they're correct, or all 3 are not going to line up if you've missed one. Now I'm doing the same thing on the other pair of cardstock panels. Again, these are 3 inches by 6 inches. It's pretty important that these are all the same size when you're making an infinity card, because it does fold in on itself, and if pieces aren't exactly the same size, then they will tend to catch. So again, you will score across, so I've marked it at 1.5 and 4.5 with the seam going across. And then I will turn it and I will mark the center of each piece vertically at 1.5. And so that will be the two pieces that I used to make the infinity card. So as you fold these in on themselves like this along the long edge, you will see that they meet in the center. If they're not meeting in the center, then you may need to trim it up a little bit, or you may need to remark your score. And that's as much as I'm going to decorate before I assemble the card. So you will see there's 4 corners that are apparent from your score marks, and that's where you're going to apply the adhesive. I like using the Fabri-Tac for this instead of a glue stick because your card is going to get opened numerous times and you need a strong adhesive to hold that together, and I don't think the glue stick does the job on cardstock. Make sure that you're gluing the front side up. I initially glued that wrong side down. Luckily, the glue did not tear the craft paper when I tore it apart, and I just added some collage pieces on top of my craft paper to cover up the glue marks. But you'll press that down, so you've only got those 4 corners glued, and you've got the bottom 2 pieces are stacked horizontally, and then the top 2 pieces are stacked vertically. And then this is how the card functions. So there's card 1, open it up vertically, card 2. Then you open it up horizontally. Those are folding now on your long crease marks. And that presents card number 3. And then you open it up again, and there is your final card. And then you can just continue to fold through, and that's why it's called an infinity card. As you're decorating your card, again, it's very important to keep it the same direction so that you don't put any embellishments on there that as it's opened present in the wrong direction. Still had some of my pencil marks there from when I was marking my score lines. I'm using, after I stamped with the rubber stamp, I'm using my micron pen to draw some simple candles. It's in using black marker to keep with my monochromatic theme. Very simple birthday candles with a little teardrop flame at the top. Then I'm drawing stripes on one, circles on one, and I'll draw a couple others on the other side. Also, when you're making an infinity card, there are a couple of panels that do show on more than one card. So when you first assemble it, fold through it a few times so that you are aware of which panels are going to show through on multiple cards. After I draw my candles, I'm going to come in with my Posca pen. It's acrylic ink. Highlight some of the parts on the candles. I found that craft paper was absorbing the acrylic ink a little bit, so I had to come back and go over a few of those marks a second time. And then I decided I needed to just add a few dots and splatters as well. Again, I had to go over them a couple of times with the white. And then repeat some of the splatter marks with the black pen. And that's going to complete what I call card number 3 of the infinity card. So for the final piece of the infinity card, I took the butterfly out of the collage pack. I adhered it to a leftover piece of the craft paper, and then I used the walnut stain ink to grunge it up a little bit on the edges, and then I felt like the card needed the same treatment, so I went around the edges of that card with the ink as well. And you'll see right there to the left of my ring finger, there's a stain that I somehow got on my card, so that's where I'm going to put the butterfly to hide that. But again, I was checking the orientation and I added that to the final page. So as we page through, there is card number 1. Card number 2, you can see those candles are showing through on card number 2, but they're also on card number 3. And then the butterfly on the back is where you can write your sentiment and finish your card. Now for the bonus, I decided to make my own wrapping paper to go along with the card. So I brought out this Scribble Flowers 1 stencil again, and the craft paper, the black ink and the white ink, and my daubers. This craft paper actually was packing material in something I'd ordered. I'm sure it was art supplies, but I decided to reuse it. So I pulled it out of my stash, and again, I'm using the same technique that I used on the panel in the card, and I'm stamping, basically alternating flowers from the stencil using the black and the white on the brown craft paper. And I like to, again, wipe off my stencil after each use so that if I choose to rotate it and use both sides, then I'm not going to have any leftover ink residue on the stencil that's going to come off on my paper. Sometimes that's what you want. If you're making collage papers, it's a great way to not waste any of your ink or paints if you're using acrylic paints. But in this instance, I needed to make sure it was clean each time. I'm not gonna make you watch me stamp this whole piece of paper, but I used this same technique, just randomly stamping with the black and the white and alternating the design. I felt like by using the stencil and using both sides of it, it creates a more random pattern and doesn't have an obvious repeat. And so I just continued to use both sides. So through the magic of video, I'm now at the last corner of my craft paper, stamping the final images with the flowers. I love this stencil. It has so many great curves and circles in it. Circle shape is one of my favorite patterns in art, and I tend to use it a lot. So this is really one of my favorite stencils. But I've about got this wrapped up, no pun intended. And there you have it, some wrapping paper and close up with the black and white on the craft paper. We're gonna flip through the card one more time. So there's card number 1. If you open that up vertically, there's 2 and 3 and 4. I added a celebrate stamp on that, and then I'm writing my sentiment. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe for Shawn's videos and more about me at Chestnut Grove Studios.